I'm here with Pieter de Vries, who is a professor who, among other things, is an expert in emerging technologies and in the way that they are used. And I'm really pleased to have Pieter here with me today. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Love to talk about your work and what you've been working on, particularly regarding emerging technologies and some of your thoughts. So can you tell me a little bit about what you've been, what's been on your mind lately?
Yes, what we've been doing lately, because there was a question about how do we use these new technologies? How can we really profit from it from a educational point of view? I'm, working at a technical university, and of course they know how to deal with virtual reality and things like that. But the discussion mostly is about what kind of a camera to use. And what I wanted to discuss is how can we use these technologies to improve education? So what do you need to be able to do that? Is there research available telling you that if you use virtual reality, you can achieve better results faster? But that's not the case. And also what we found, and that's clear, that especially in the technical engineering education, the point is that they study all different things. So there's no one solution that could be applied. And you could say, okay, this is, the way to go. And therefore, we also thought we have to talk with the teachers, but not only with the teachers, also with the people who support the teachers. We also have to talk about, what the policy is of the university. So we set up a research looking at these different things, not just looking at the technology, but looking at, what is needed to decide about what technology to use for what and what do you want to achieve. So what we did actually, we did some desk research. We went to visit some other universities in Europe. We also talked to a couple of businesses who were known for using these technologies and try to make up our mind. It was an interesting thing that, for example, the one company said, this, for example, virtual reality allows us to make repairs at a distance. So we sell something, a printing machine, very big printing machine. We support, the maintenance of the machine, but we are talking here about the buyers from Latin America. And there you have the engineers. And in the early days, the engineers, they would come to the Netherlands and, get a course, but things are changing rapidly. So the machine is different, etc. So we are using virtual reality because we can take a look at the machine from a distance and work together with these engineers. So for them, it had a clear business value, very much directly. They weren't using it to improve their education or training, but much more to support the business. One other issue that's rather big in Europe is we're missing out on engineers. The numbers are not quite clear, but they're talking about 200, 300, 400,000 engineers we really need. And not just general engineers, but engineers who are capable of doing particular things with particular skills. And so we had the idea that this might be a connection, because what we've seen in universities, sometimes they have a course virtual reality. But by the time the course is there and the course is finished, virtual reality has changed completely. Other cameras, other programs and things like that. So it means that you as a university, if you try to stay in line with what's happening in the industry and really give your students also, the skills that are in demand, then you have to find a solution for that. I mean, this gap has been there for ages, I know. Between university and the demand of the businesses. But here we might have an opportunity if you start using virtual reality at a university on a educational level, then students will get to know the technology, how to use it, not a particular application, but in general get a good idea of what it is, which would lower the threshold for them in a company to cope with questions dealing with virtual reality. In the end, what did we find out? In general, teachers are very eager to improve education, like always. But especially with the new technologies, they're most of the time too complicated to get to know them, like for virtual reality, it is complicated. Then you have the financial part because it will cost a little bit more money. You have to plan, etc., etc. Things change rapidly. Sometimes also cameras are not being used anymore after a year. So there are, it is quite complicated to really move forward, and you as a teacher try to figure out if this could work for you or not. Our conclusion was, if you really want to deal with these emerging technologies, you have to work together. Now, this research was being initiated by 4TU. 4TU is the 4 technical universities in the Netherlands. They have a program where they try to improve the collaboration and move forward a bit, more directed than before. And there's one opportunity within this program to do these kind of research to, try to get ahead of what is happening. What we talked with teachers using these kind of tools, emerging technologies, and also the Internet of Things, or robots, and they said, if I want to use it to improve education, the difficulty is to maintain the technology as such, or change the technology. I might have enough capabilities to analyze it, but to make it fit for education, that's a different thing. In general, they were pleased using something else and trying it out because students also appreciate it. But they were very reluctant to say that this was the solution they had ever been thinking about. They were very reluctant to, they said, I'm not able to prove yet if this is really working better than what we did up till now. And therefore, we thought this must be done collaboratively. You have to do this together. Also, because new technologies are coming and you would like to decide, is this helpful or not? And I think universities need to get wise and really spend time on thinking about technology, because there's another issue coming up. Some of the teachers, some of the professors we talked to, they were pretty much annoyed by the fact that all the student data were collected by platforms they were using. And they said they're obviously the students or the student data are being used for businesses. They try to develop their own business and they say thank you to you, although you pay for the machinery you get, but they, get an extra. And I think that's something that's, if we're talking about, the pandemic, and something that will quickly develop is also this more or less commercial approach of education. Everybody needs to go online now, but how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we arrange things? What kind of applications do we use? What is the best way to do it? And what you see happening is that rather, big companies within the educational technology field, they come and they say, we have a solution for you. And I would like education to be aware of the fact that this cannot be a solution without education participating in thinking about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in my view, it's always been kind of the mix of education and technology. So it's not even just it's partly a matter of thinking about how do we best use new technologies and reimagine education in different ways as well. And so there's also probably a tendency sometimes to take existing models and try to move them to a new technology, as opposed to thinking, well, what can we do with this to improve
Yeah.
education in the business world, to improve performance. In terms of the relationship between universities and businesses, what are your thoughts on how they could best work together in terms of getting technology in the right position to help people work better and more efficiently and really more pleasantly?
I gave you the example of thinking about the jobs, or the skills requirements of the businesses. The experience we have is that most of the time for the businesses, it's also difficult to indicate what kind of skills they need, because you're talking about not tomorrow, but in a year or 2 years. So that's difficult. So I think closer working together, and that happens increasingly, closely working together, but also on a very practical level. So that's something we try to stimulate, is that students work, they have an internship. That's one of the issues, but really work on particular issues using the technology of the company, but also use the technology, bring it back to the university if that's possible, and further develop the idea of how can we use this to improve education, to make it more attractive for students, to make it also something that relatively easy can be dealt with by the teachers, by the institution. And what we would like also is a better exchange between universities and businesses. At the university, we produce these nice papers and things like that. The experience is that most of the papers are not being read by the companies because the threshold is too high. It's too complicated. It's not practical enough. And I think there we should also look into and see what we can do to improve on that level, because that's really where we meet, I think, the businesses. And especially, I must say, in the pandemic development, what you see happening is that some businesses, unfortunately, they have to close the doors. Other businesses are growing. So it will be rather difficult for businesses, but also for universities, to have an appropriate reaction to that when it comes to education. So what are you going to tell we know that we need more doctors or nurses, but what kind of doctors, what kind of nurses? We're learning a lot, and also in Europe, we're learning a lot about how not to do something, but how do you do it right? And with what resources, and so I surely hope that universities will find a way to better collaborate with the businesses, to better supply students also with the opportunities to work in the business, and in that way get a better development, and not let the development be directed by companies coming from the outside. And the first aim is, and in Europe this is still a hot item, we talk about education. We're not talking about profitable business when we talk about education. Of course, there are schools who focus more on that level, but I think the other part is we have to take care of that, and especially I think engineering education. If you look at e-learning, engineering education has been very reluctant of using e-learning, although they were the people who knew the technologies and could analyze the technologies, etc. But they hardly did it. They hardly applied it. At our university, luckily, I was involved. We started, that must be 6-7 years ago, with the first MOOCs. And that was I think, wonderful experience. There was a lot of reluctance, but there was also curiosity. And I think a few professors who were good professors started to use this MOOC approach to improve their education. And others were looking at that, other professors, and they started believing, oh, this might give me the opportunity to really improve, to do it differently, and to achieve goals I've never been able to in the past. And the one thing I liked about the MOOCs, and that has not been covered that much, is the fact that, at least at our university, we see proof that the MOOCs coming meant that it provoked interest of the professors for educational innovation. It seems like they got an idea that educational innovation for the first time is something achievable. Some didn't know about it. They're very much technical teachers, and they were teaching like they had been taught 30 years ago, same way. And they've done it well. I mean, this is not about, the level, but they've seen that with some other means, you can achieve other goals, and also the level of satisfaction of teaching was going up. So that's what I liked, at least, about the MOOC development we had in Delft.
Yeah, there's something interesting about that, and even if it turns out to be a model that not everybody wants to use, and it certainly doesn't fit everything, that it raises, the idea, as you mentioned, of that other things could be possible, and in some ways might challenge professors to start thinking about education a little bit more than they have. Say, well, okay, this MOOC thing, that I can see some things, but I can do better, and maybe they'll want to go out and do better, as opposed to simply keeping things, status quo.
Yeah. It was it stimulated thinking about education. And so there we already have a difference, because normally, at least in the technical universities, you have to spend most of the time on your subject, because it's moving so fast. But now they became interested in thinking about education as something that was really worthwhile. And also, and this is a nice example, one of the first MOOCs was about trying to collect sun rays to produce electricity. And the thing with this approach was that the first MOOC on this was with approximately 50,000 students from everywhere. So we talked to the teacher, and we said, you have 50,000, they subscribed, and you have approximately about 15,000 who really worked with you. And what you can do is you can ask them what kind of systems they use. And so he got back something like 3,000 videos, photos, descriptions of how they solved their electricity problems using, sunlight. And this was an interesting thing, because he started using this material for publishing and analyzing and doing other things. So it's a good way to get this interaction and to use the interaction also for other things. So that's another thing. I guess you could say, okay, the MOOCs, they do something, and they have these I would say secondary positive effects.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go back to something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned sort of the disconnect that sometimes comes up between academia and the business world. And one of the goals of the ICLW conference is to bring academics and business together into one venue, and it's always a challenge. You mentioned that academic papers tend to not be read by people in the business world all that often, for many reasons, and certainly one of which is people just don't have the time either, as well as not seeing the practicality. Are there suggestions we could come up with for how to make some of the academic research more accessible, more palatable? Should people, it's a different world. Should people be filming a short video of their findings and, put it in a format? Are there things that you might suggest as someone who's worked in both worlds that you feel would really, help that collaboration, help further that?
Yes. Well, one of the ideas we have is that students can play an important role in this. So you could say, okay, let's try to develop a paper together. You're doing this project. You're also working in the company, and we also, talk with the company about the paper. What do they want to see? What do they need to know to do this better? And it's about a problem they have. So it gets very close. And that's a way of, helping the student, helping the business, and helping the professor also, because he can, collect these kind of papers and use them as, practical examples of what is happening in the business. And I think this collaboration could be done. And I know, like you already told, they don't have the time. Well, with Zoom, they might have, they're used to it. And I think if they start using these kind of tools, it will be easier. It will, it will bring them together more easily. And that would be a good thing to do. And I guess some people are experimenting these kind of things. And it would be great if it will, function in such a way as we think.
One thing you mentioned that definitely matters is, among other things, is the practical application, right? So that, especially if you're in the business world, there are always time pressures. You just, you're going to feel this, but if it's something that you can see the application of and you can see the benefit, at least, short to medium term, there's, it's going to drive you to participate a lot more, I would think, than if it's going to be further down the road or a little bit more ambiguous how directly that's going to help you. And that's always a challenge in business environments. And, and as the,
Yes.
short-term thinking has a lot of dangers. We want to, make sure that we don't think only in the short term, but we can leverage that, I think, in those ways to get some of the ideas that have a longer history, out into in practical situations.
Yes. My experience with the company in the eastern part of the where they, developed all kinds of systems for long distance communication. And what we did was, and that was, I think, rather successful, is ask them to pose a question they had, but were not able yet to give an answer. So it was not working on a certain process that was already going on, and where they have, a couple of ideas and they just wanted to test the ideas, but really give a question that was unsolved, but had some urgency. And that was very helpful in the sense that I noticed with the students that when the manager presented this, they were looking at him like, oh my God, this is a real question. They feel it. They feel that this is not just, okay, we have 5 things for you to do, make a choice, and it's okay. No, this was, could you please help us solving this question? And the nice thing about it is that the students all realized immediately we have to set up a good communication system among ourselves to be able to answer the question, not just to answer the question, but communicate with the company to make sure that we're still talking about that question and that we're not going to the left or to the right or whatever. So that was I found it a good experience. And the students, they were in there for the whole time. I remember the last meeting we had, there were 140 students, they were all there. So this was really, they were interested in the reaction of the company on the solutions they found. And to hear from the manager if this was good or not so good. So that's a pleasure of a teacher if you see that students really like it.
Certainly is. Let me shift gears just for one additional question I wanted to get to. We talked about emerging technology. We talked more about virtual reality. Can we talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and where it fits in and where we see AI coming into education? It's certainly been my own background in a lot of ways, but we're at a very different point now in terms of both people's expectations and maybe what's out there and what should be out there. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on AI and AI.
Yes. I think it's a very complicated technology. It's really, it's not easy to do things with it, which basically means that you always have to try to find partners who are really skilled to do something in that field. So that makes it more difficult. I think we should really look at artificial intelligence in how this could help. Not so much, predict things. Can we, for example, analyze the behavior of a student and then predict how the student will develop his career on the basis of all these data? This is what is called, the dataism, in the sense that, if we have the data, then we can make sure that, the student will not be a problem in the end, but he will be, successful. I think that's a too easy way. People are much more complicated than that. In university, what you can see is students who do a wonderful job the first year, the second year, and the third year you don't see them anymore. And there you have students who hardly make it and they flourish, and in the third year, wonderful. So we have to be very, very careful, I think, with the use of artificial intelligence. And this is something I would really recommend to discuss this, talk about it, look at the applications and see, is this really what we're looking for? It should be helpful. Artificial intelligence should serve us, not the other way around.
Oh, absolutely. And the other part of this that I tend to look at is to look at the experiences we can create and where AI can help us do that, more than looking at simply the data, as you were saying, and people want to just analyze everything and predict. And then I guess I'd also add that rather than predict, I would hope we at least move from predicting to supporting, right? So it's, the goal, we're not taking bets on who's going to be a success and who's going to be a failure. And I don't think that's the right way to look at the world. We should be looking at what can we do with this information to help everybody succeed along a path that they're going to be, make sense for them, is going to be enjoyable and comfortable for them. And that there is something that can help, but it's in a more supportive way and can then feed back into the experiences that we create to help people learn what's interesting to them in ways that are appropriate for them and interesting to them.
Definitely. So it's wonderful to have these instruments. It's wonderful to look at the possibilities, because every time you read an article about AI, then there's something more to it. But I think education has the obligation to really be a partner and not just a consumer of the new technologies. Up till now, I have the impression that universities, if you look at the history of learning platforms, you see at the time when, I'm talking about 15 years ago, the first learning platforms, universities were overwhelmed by the technology. They didn't really know what to do with it. Supposedly it was a learning platform, but most of the time it was an administrative tool. And so there was a lot of, misconception. And I think education has the obligation to avoid the same situation with new technologies, which are even more complicated as artificial intelligence, to take the same attitude.
Yeah, no, there's a huge opportunity here, and it's an opportunity, I think, for lots of thinking and creativity, and for looking at what we really can do, and certainly moving away from just the model of tracking and the sort of view that that's what we're going to get out of this is knowing all about you, as opposed to doing something to help people and help society, and it's a mindset change as well as everything else, I think.
Yes. And I surely hope that, the COVID or the pandemic, things will change rapidly because of all kinds of reasons. I see programs saying, okay, you can subscribe in a course and we will help you to plan for the future. I'm very reluctant in that sense, that because we do not really know how the future will look like, but we need to think about it. That's completely right. So, and hopefully the pandemic will, in the end, because there's a lot of sorrow going on, but in the end, it will help us to, to create a better society for education, for students, for everybody. and maybe we are capable of, helping to make decisions that are for the good of education.
Yeah, I hope so as well, and I think so, and I do share your cautious optimism, and I think that may be a good note to wrap up on. There is, it's been a tremendously difficult time, and there is at least some optimism that some good things can come out of it for the long term, but for education and for society as a whole. So Peter, I want to thank you so much for your time, for talking with me today. Work you're doing is tremendously interesting, both applying to the university world and to the business world, and it's been great talking with you.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, David.